For the first time ever, Chris and Company rolls on during a time in which the Detroit Tigers are playing in October. This is pretty incredible, and it's why in the summer months when we did interviews, just to kind of let you behind the curtain here, when we did interviews in the summer months, we would do them weeks out, right? You know, we could afford to, because you do an interview, not a whole lot's going to break during the summer, especially if it's not baseball related, which is the only sport that's really going on. So we can record stuff 2-3 weeks in advance. With the craziness that's gone on, I want these to be very pertinent. So I am recording this right now on Monday, September 30th. By the time this is uploaded, it will be October 1st, which will be the day of Game 1 of the American League wildcard round between the Detroit Tigers and the Houston Astros. If you've been following my content, if you know anything about me, you know how important this is. You know how cool this is. If you want more Tigers content or me breaking down this series, the previewing the series, all of that stuff is on my Twitter at Castellani 2014. But this is an interview show, and the Tigers, we found out that they'd made the playoffs on Friday after they beat the White Sox. So scrambled a little bit to try to find somebody, because look, I feel like I'm busy. It's nothing compared to what the actual media in this state and the credentialed people have to do, the people that are traveling down to Houston, going all over. So we were able to find a guest for this week. The biggest shout out ever to Daniella Bruce, who's joining this program today. This is a huge get. Daniella's obviously been a star here for a while, and she's been on Bally. She's done Red Wing stuff, and they've had her do a lot more Tiger stuff. She is going to be doing this interview from Houston. She traveled down there with the team. So I'm sure that her life is a whirlwind right now. But like, before we even get to the interview, people in the comments, people on social media, follow her. Give her a shout out. I appreciate the heck out of her for doing this. This was not an easy turnover for her, and she is doing yours truly and in turn the audience of this podcast a massive, massive favor. Can you tell I'm nervous? Not so much nervous for the interview, but the fact is, the Detroit Tigers playing in the playoffs, like, and this happened fast. So like, I'm trying to get my wits about me, still trying to figure out what this week is going to look like for content and everything. Austin and I have been talking. You're going to figure out kind of on the fly. That's the thing, is when you get to the postseason, you know, you don't know how many games are promised. We're trying to make the most of it, and it starts with this show today. If you're watching this or listening to this on a Tuesday and you say, wait a minute, Chris and Company is usually a Wednesday show. Where's All Say This? All Say This will be up on Wednesday. We will record that episode after Game 1. Just the way that it works, I wanted to get the interview with Daniella up on Tuesday before Game 1. The series will still be going on. They're guaranteed to play at least 2 games. So we will discuss what happened after Game 1. After that, we're going to record on Tuesday. I don't know where that's going to be from. It might be from here. It might be from, a hotel room. It's going to be a little bit helter-skelter, but this is something that content-wise we've waited 8 years for. From a fan perspective, it's something that we've waited 10 years for. So I want to try to make the most of it. I feel like I owe that to you guys as somebody who's made a lot of Tigers content over the last several years. It's an exciting time, and I'm trying to, and this is difficult. I struggle with this. I'm trying to take in the moment for what it is. This has been a miracle run by the Tigers. We're trying to take advantage of it. We're trying to have fun with it. But at the same time, I also want to make sure that I'm putting out the best stuff for my audience. And a huge, huge first step was being able to get Daniella to agree to this interview. Also, second woman to be featured on Chris and Company. I highly doubt she'd put that on a job resume. She's done much more important things, but the first non-Barstool person, first non-Barstool woman to be featured on the show. So we're all about inclusion. And honestly, like, Daniella's just really good at her job, and I look forward to talking Tigers with her. So let's just go ahead and jump right into it. We'll get to that interview with Daniella Bruce. Again, shout out to her for coming on the show. And then we will be right back to wrap this thing up, plug socials, cheer on the Tigers. I'll see you in a second. Let's get to our interview with Daniella. Chris and Company playoff edition. And there's nobody else we'd rather have on. How crazy is that to say, by the way? Like, who would have thought that a month ago? How cool is that?
Playoff baseball.
It's the greatest.
Playoff baseball. The Tigers playing playoff baseball. Let me clarify there.
Yes, and we are joined today by somebody who is on location, reporting live from, well, technically not live, you're listening to this, but reporting from Houston, Texas for the Detroit Tigers. Digital reporter for the Tigers, for the Red Wings. You've known her, you've seen her face, you've heard her voice. Daniella Bruce, doing us all a huge favor by joining the show today. Daniella, you have arrived in Houston, several hours ago?
Yeah, just a few hours ago. That's right. We got in here, kind of got settled in, and I'm feeling the nerves already. I guess that's pretty normal, right? But yeah, we're settled in.
Yeah, I mean, anyone who's followed my content knows that I'm a naturally very anxious person. So you add playoff baseball on top of that. Like, I'm trying to, for this interview, just keep the nerves at bay. But we'll see how it works. But that's kind of where I wanted to start with you, which is, I mean, we talk about the baseball season being a marathon and not a sprint. But this run by the Tigers to me was a sprint. It was, you got to play catch up fast. You got to win a lot of games. You got to win a lot of series. And then it all, culminated in the clincher on Friday. Have you, just as somebody who's been covering the team, have you been able to kind of breathe through this entire thing? Have the last few days kind of allowed you to take a step back, or has it felt like one big blur?
One big blur. There has been no break. And even when I wasn't on the road, I did take a break from Tigers to go to Traverse City and cover Red Wings training camp. So I wasn't with the team, but I was locked. I was locked in on every single game, every single pitch. And just, it's felt that way for a while. Just go, go, go. And it's great though. You don't want them to stop now, right? You want to keep this rolling a little bit longer, just a little longer, and see what they can do here. And I think it's been an incredible run. I get the question a lot, are you surprised that they put this run together? Did you expect this? And I'd be lying to you if I said I thought the Tigers were going to make a playoff spot. If you asked me back even at the beginning of August, if I thought we'd be here. But what I always did know is that this team had talent. They had heart. All of those players in that room were capable of big things. It just didn't seem like this was going to be the year. And what they've done is spectacular.
That was kind of my stance on them, even when they were struggling, which is, I think that because of injuries and because of just some inconsistencies, I feel like things have gotten away from them. I said, it feels like forever ago that I said this, but I did feel like they were better than their record, because preseason I had them at 85 wins. Like, I felt like this could be, ultimately, ironically, they kind of ended up being the team I thought they'd be. They just did it in a very kind of bizarre order, with getting crazy hot. And you've been around the players and the been in the clubhouse, and I'm just curious. AJ has been so consistent with his message from day one about, look, we want to try to win today's game. We want to turn good series into good weeks, into good months, and then by then you can have a good season. But do you feel like there was a point with the team where there was kind of a switch that flipped, where they went from, okay, let's just try to win every game, to, we're in this, like, let's really go for this? Do you feel like there was a moment that happened?
There were so many moments throughout this run where you could pinpoint, like, oh, that was the moment. Like, we could go back to Baltimore and they give up a 2-run lead in the 9th inning and end up winning the game somehow. So that you can go back to that moment. You could go back to San Diego, where they're down and Parker Meadows comes up and hits the grand slam and they salvage a game in that series. And that one, for me, I would probably say that's the moment for me that I was like, okay, this is for real. They can actually stay in this. Because if you get swept there, the whole run doesn't look the same in my mind. You go to Oakland to play and you're kind of down after getting swept by the Padres, but that moment kind of encapsulate what the season has been. And I actually went even further back in another conversation I had, to the Dodgers series at Comerica Park.
Yeah.
And I think this was pre-trade deadline.
For sure.
So yes, it was pre-trade deadline, because Jack Flaherty was not a Dodger yet. So, but it was coming back in the 9th inning the way they did and walking it off the next day, just 2 really dramatic games against one of the league's highest payrolls, best teams. It's like, we're here to battle against everybody, and they can battle against anybody. And then what Parker Meadows has been able to do since he's come back, what Torque has been able to do since he's come back. I think there were a lot of really positive things that all just came together at once. But for me, the big moment is that grand slam, the Parker Meadows grand slam in San Diego.
I'm with you. I mean, those are the kind of moments where, like, they just, you need those moments to make the playoffs, to have a run like what they've had. And I felt like they just kind of added one magic step on top of another. And I'm glad you bring up the Dodgers series, because I feel like there was kind of the gritty Tigers were kind of born during that like 2-week stretch where they were really struggling. They go to Cincinnati, I think, after the 4th of July. They sweep Cincinnati on the road with some comeback wins. Colt Keith really started going. He had the 2-home run game. And then the 5-run 9th against the Dodgers, and you win on a walk-off bunt the next day. I feel like that was kind of the inception of this run. It might not, it might have taken them a little bit after that. But yeah, I mean, they stayed true to the message of playing all 9 innings. I think that's what's made this team so fun. Tarek Skubal, obviously, going game 1, as expected. Friend of the program. He's been the dude all year. I mean, like even before this season, I was a Tarek guy. I think it's been one of the coolest things ever. He is, I mean, you've grown up around here, similar to Verlander, those guys. He made every fifth day an event, and it's going to be an event tomorrow. I guess as someone who's seen what he's been able to do and the way that he goes about his business, what is something about Tarek Skubal that you feel like maybe goes unseen or unrecognized by the general public?
I just think it's the behind the scenes work. And I know you'll hear that from AJ too, but every single day Tarek is grinding. He's on schedule. He's going out to his workouts. He's got this dialed in routine that most pitchers do have, but I think it takes some time to kind of get the right fit for you, for each pitcher. And he's found that, and he stays true to it every single day. And he's super passionate about everything that he does. You can tell when he's pitching, you see that emotion come out, passionate about his family, passionate about this team, passionate about winning games. And he gives it everything he has. And that's real. And I think that's where you see some of his success coming from, is that he puts his heart and soul into it. And obviously working with Chris Fetter, the two of them have a great relationship. He's done magical things with many pitchers on this team. So being able for them to be able to work together and get to this point and see the routine and everything that's happened because of they found that right routine, they found the right work for him to put in. And the funny thing is AJ talks about it, Tarek talks about it, like unlocking another level. Is there another level to Tarek Skubal that's feels unimaginable right now, but they still feel like there's more that he could do. He could be more creative with his first pitch strikes. He could throw different things to get ahead in the count. So there's just little things that they think he could do more of, and we could see unlock another level in the coming years.
I'd say good luck to everybody else if that happens.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, because
even better Tarek Skubal.
Good luck, man. I mean, we were talking about a Triple Crown winner and a future Cy Young winner, so that would be fantastic. And I agree with you completely, which is I think, look, this game when you get to the major leagues can humble you, and you got 100-mile-per-hour fastball in your back pocket. I think there's a huge difference. We saw Verlander, we see the great ones do it, learning the difference between pitching and throwing. Where he talked about it. Where he's like, when I was in the minors, I threw 70% fastballs and just blew guys away. It's like the development of his changeup, the development of his slider, the mixing of speeds. I think it's just made him a nightmare because you go and step into the box against a guy like that, you're thinking sit here, upper 90s fastball, and he's starting you off or finishing you with a changeup or a slider. He's been remarkable. You brought up Chris Fetter, who I've praised a million times, and rightfully so, as we all have. I guess you have a little bit more of a behind the scenes look, but like when people ask me what makes Fetter so effective, I say he's smart. You brought up passion with Skubal. I feel it's like that. I think the psychological element, I think he gets to know these guys very well and knows what works for each individual guy, and data. Like he just has access to all this stuff that he shows to these guys. But as somebody who said kind of closer access, what makes him so special?
I actually think as far as the pitching goes, he's a great person. Like in general,
he's a really
good person.
Yeah.
But you nailed it with being able to tailor his plan to each specific pitcher in the correct way, because they have access to so much information. And some pitchers don't want to know all of it. Like, tell me exactly what I need to know and what I need to change. Other pitchers want to know all of it. And it just takes finding the personality of each pitcher, finding out what works for them, and playing to their strengths. And we've seen that he does it so well. There's a long list. I could go down the list of even the Cater Monteros, Brant Herter, Brendan Hanafy, Sean Gunther that come up here when Ty Madden too is on that list. When their ERAs in the minors, you're kind of scratching your head thinking, are we sure they're ready for the big leagues? And then they get to work with Chris Fetter. They're obviously looking for something very specific and can see these strengths in each player. And he's helping identify those. And then he's building on them once they get to the big leagues, which is incredible. And like I said, I think the players being able to relate to him because of how good of a person he is too, how fun he is to be around is a huge help. I don't know. Did you see him when he had to wear the Texas sweatshirt?
Yeah, I know.
So, him and Ty Madden have fun little bet going on the Michigan and Texas game, and he has to rock that orange sweatshirt in the bullpen. And of course it was all over camera on Bally everywhere. So he's having fun with them while also making them great pitchers.
Yeah. Every guest that I've had on here who is a professional athlete, especially with baseball, I ask them the analytics questions and the data questions because I'm so fascinated by that, because we have so much access to so much stuff that I wonder at what point does it become overload, where it's like, dude, I just need to, if you're a hitter, I just want to see ball, hit ball. If you're a pitcher, I just want to be able to execute. And there's so much that we have access to, and you get differing answers. Like Tarek struck me as someone who's really into the data, and like he was bringing up seam shifted weight change on his changeup and really getting better. Whereas there's some other guys who are like, I just want to trust my stuff, locate my pitches. And I think it's finding out that there's definitely not a one size fits all approach when it comes to pitching that makes it, that has made Federer an effective coach. You look at this era that we're in now, obviously Scott Harris in year 2, and I always ask this question to people who've been around both eras, and it's not even in a way where like I want people to criticize one end or the other, but it's just, I think that we've seen Scott Harris inherit a lot of Avila's players, and a lot of them have taken off. I mean, Wencel Perez became who he became really over the last few years. Same with somebody like Parker. I guess as someone who's worked in the field for both regimes at some point, what are just some differences that you've seen in the way that the organization has kind of gone about their business over the last several years?
Well, I think the focus on the development of these players has been super, super evident and highlighted, and a huge focus on it since Scott Harris took over. And I think he knew he had talent in this organization. Mm-hmm. I don't think there was ever a moment where he felt like he was working with nothing, as some fans may have thought, right? That might have been the narrative for some people, but I don't think he ever felt that way. And as we just talked about pitching, I think the same goes for hitters too. If you can find a hitter's strength and you can work with them to become the best version of themselves, then there's usually going to be a place for them, right? And he saw it very early with Colt Keith. He signed a major league deal before he even played a major league game. So I think just for me, the focus on the analytics, the focus on playing to a player's strengths, finding the right matchups for pitchers, finding the right matchups for hitters, as we've seen AJ do a lot of. And I think Scott and AJ have a really tight relationship, which is also something that's very evident from being around, just the way that they operate together and the way that they seem to be in lockstep with the decisions they make and the way that they want to run this team and the way that they want to play baseball. So I think I've noticed just a lot more of that and wanting to develop young talent. And we've seen Scott Harris take a lot of high school talent in the draft. We are excited to see what Max Clark is going to do. And I think there's just a lot to be excited about, knowing the way that they put a lot of resources into their development and making their facilities great at every level in the minor leagues. And I feel like that's been the heavy focus, and we're starting to see some of the fruits of that labor in the big league.
Yeah, and that was something he focused on right away, which is just like some of it was like cultural upgrades, and some of it was like upgrade facilities, update plane, update like clubhouse, like kind of bringing it, this doesn't have any impact on the team, but updating scoreboard, making changes to the park. Like I do think that there was a main focus to kind of push things into the 21st century, and up to this point, it's worked. And it's something I've talked about a million times, which is the older I get, the more I pay attention to what system players are in as opposed to the players themselves. Because I think we've seen over the last few years, like, yeah, there was talent here. Like Parker Meadows has a high upside. Wencel's got a high upside. And even, we've seen the development of the pitchers over the last few years. It's more so the tools that you give them, I feel like, that allow them to develop. That's been a really huge part of this. Have you had a lot of like interactions with Scott Harris?
No, I wouldn't say a ton. Yes, quite. Yeah. I see him. We talk. He's a new dad. He's a little busy, so he's got a lot going on right now with this baseball team on top of that. But he's around all the time. So that's another thing that you notice about Scott Harris. He's there all the time. He's in his office. He's working. He's watching every single game from the press box. He's always there and always around, and very willing to answer questions, have conversations. And I think my interactions with him have been great. And this is going to sound strange, but he's so young. Like he's the general manager that I feel like he's a peer in some circumstances. So it's great. He's been phenomenal to work with, phenomenal to have around. And same thing for AJ. Like I think AJ has changed my perspective of baseball from working with him and being able to learn from him every single day. There's a lot that I take away from how this organization is being run and the people that they have in place right now. It's really exciting. And I know that we've been preaching future for so long, and we're excited to have playoffs right now, but I'm even more excited for what we're going to see in the next few years. For sure.
Do you think he's surprised by what's happened here?
I don't want to speak for him, but
that's fair. I'm not trying to put you on the
spot. I feel like there is no way that anybody really expected this run. I feel like everyone has the same thought of, and he knows it way better. He knew Trey Sweeney could play in the big leagues when everybody was criticizing that trade, right? Like he obviously knew there was talent in that room, and there's talent on this roster, and he knows that AJ Hinch knows how to manage a baseball team. So surprise would probably be the wrong word, but maybe they over delivered this year. Maybe that's the way to put it.
And I think just the sequence in which they went about it was very strange. I think it's very comparable, honestly, to the Lions several years back, where the first year and a half of the Dan Campbell era, you're like, this doesn't seem like it's working out. And then they just had that home game against Green Bay when they were like 1-6, and all of a sudden they just turned it on. They were great the rest of the way. They were great the next season. It kind of feels like something has happened with that with the Tigers, where a switch just sort of flipped. One thing that a bunch of fans got really excited for, myself included, and I was surprised by, was the Jackson Jobe call up a week ago, because I was adamant, and really based on the reading the tea leaves and what I heard from Scott Harris, it seemed like they were pretty adamant. We're not seeing Jobe this year. Do you feel like, I mean, I'm not going to ask if they were lying, but do you feel like perception changed when they saw, like, yeah, we got a shot at this now, like let's call up the kid out of the pen?
I would think so. And I think the thing to remember too, again, we just talked about the whole slew of pitchers that didn't have great numbers in the minors, but still got the call up and are doing really great things in the big leagues. I think they sent Jackson Jobe to Toledo with a list of things they probably needed him to do, right? And we're never going to know exactly what those things were, but they saw what they needed to see from him. And they said, yeah, like we've got a chance at this. And, he could be a weapon in a playoff run. So we're going to bring him up and see what he could do. And that was another, I didn't think that was going to happen either. I had no inkling that they were going to call up Jackson Jobe. So that was a surprise to me. And I think that's another thing that's really exciting. But imagine for Jackson Jobe right now, gets the call up to the big leagues, been here like less than a week, and he gets to have a whole champagne locker room.
Yeah.
He's like, wow, the big leagues are great. So
yeah, no, they asked him. I can't remember who it was that asked. It might have been Johnny, who was like, what was your reaction to the fans, chanting your name in your first out? He's like, they won me over pretty easily. Like this is not much of a learning curve there. Yeah, I mean, I'm just curious, and this isn't a question, but it's just, I'm curious how they use him, because like his stuff is so good. But at the same time, it's you're talking about a guy who's pitched 4 major league innings, like relatively low leverage. I don't know. It'll be interesting to see if and when they decide to put him into a game at any point in the series.
It's a mystery to me too. And did you hear AJ's quote today that said
all about chaos?
Yep.
Yeah.
Terrible tomorrow, and then they're going to pitch with chaos. So expect anything at any time. Be ready for anything at any time. And I think he's gonna leave it all out there. They want to try to win this series. So I think we're going to see even more so of the chaos that we've seen in the past few weeks.
Do you think, and one thing I think AJ's done a great job of over the last, since he's been here, really when he was in Houston, is like, he's never made anything about him. When Miggy was making his run, this is about Miggy. When the team's making their runs, it's about the players. But I would be lying if I haven't, it hasn't occurred to me that, hey, he's going back to Houston and he's going up against his former team. And, a lot of those players are still there. He managed Altuve and Jordan and those guys. Do you think there's some, I'm not going to say, I don't think retribution, because I think he's got a good relationship with them still. But do you think that's in the back of his head about like, hey, I have a chance to really do something kind of neat here on a personal level?
Of course, AJ's still human, and he's probably never going to say that. And like you said, he likes to make it about his team because, I mean, he's right. The players are the ones that got them to this point. He put them in the position to make them the most successful, but they got the job done to get here. And he wants it to be about them and them experiencing playoffs for the first time for many of them. But I do think that's, like I said, he's human. That would happen to any of us, right? Mm-hmm. You go back, he's going to feel good over any win, but if he gets to walk away with taking this wild card series from Houston, that's going to feel good for him. And I think he should feel really good about it, that he's back in the game. And I know he said it before that he didn't know if he'd ever manage again. And he's here in Detroit doing a phenomenal job with a really young team. All of it would be so exciting, but I think this is just baseball. Like, of course we're in Houston. This is just exactly what baseball would do to us, right?
When I was watching the way that they had managed kind of the last 2 games, I genuinely don't think AJ cared about the matchups, but like you said, with the baseball gods being who they are, like, yeah, of course they lost those last 2 games. Like it was gonna end with this storyline. I mean, I think it's very similar, and somebody tweeted this at me, of Stafford returning to Detroit for the playoffs last year, because AJ, from almost unanimously from every Astros fan in my feed, is worshipped by that fan base. Like they still love him. And the thing is, with playoffs, that can change very quickly. If they win those 2 games, he might not have as high of an approval rating. But yeah, it's obviously going to be a storyline, and I understand. But yeah, it'll be fun to watch. As far as kind of where the team's psyche is at, I think one thing that's unique, and I talked about it with you a little bit earlier, is that I feel like they've been in playoff mode for like a month plus now, with the amount of close games and high leverage games that they've had to play and the way that they've managed the pen. Do you feel like this last month is in a lot of ways going to help them, because it's kind of their audition tape for what the kind of environments you're going to get in the postseason?
I think so. And nothing's going to compare to the feeling they feel when they go out and take that field tomorrow. But or today, if you're listening to this is when we recorded. But he, AJ said at one point that I'm going to do everything I can. It was right after they clinched, I think, to convince this team that they have been playing playoff style baseball for the last couple of weeks, for the last month or so of the season. They've been really in the high pressure situations, the must win situations. They're playing really tight games. And I think that they understand that too. But AJ has also done a very good job of keeping this clubhouse calm, keeping the players even keeled. And I think he's going to do a good job of it in the playoffs. Of course, the nerves are going to be there. They're going to have the jitters when they go out there tomorrow. But even I had a conversation with Spencer Torkelson that stuck out to me just about the way that AJ runs his teams. And Spencer Torkelson was like, that's our guy. And he's consistent every single day with his demeanor, the way he approaches each and every game. We could be in the middle of a 10-game losing streak, or we could be on a run like we are right now. And he comes to the ballpark every day with the exact same mentality. So that's rubbed off on his team. And I think that's going to be something that's beneficial as we get into the playoffs here.
It's funny because I've seen on the internet some, and AJ right now should be the toast of the town, but some criticism of how even keel he is. And my response to that is like, people like me are the ones who like get permission to freak out and like just sky's falling down. You can't do that when you're the manager and leading like 26 other guys. Like he's going to continue. And I think that has, even when this team wasn't winning, that's helped them in the way that they've responded to brutal losses. You brought up the San Diego Parker Meadows or Grand Slam, and that was obviously a huge moment. But it seems like a while ago now. The next night, they lost a really brutal game to Oakland. The kind of game where you used a lot of pitchers, you had it won. You had it won in the late innings. Skubal pitched. That's the kind of game where there are teams that would lose that game twice or even three times. They responded with 2 wins. I think that psychologically, this team does a really good job of keeping a short memory, and that's huge of the postseason because things are going to go sideways at some point. Hopefully they can keep their head on straight. This year, I have a lot of takes, obviously, and I'm often wrong. But one thing that I was right about is that I made a prediction when Jason Benetti was hired here that he was going to be worshipped by this fan base at some point. I have turned out to be correct, and that was more so to do with the fact that I known of him as a person, as a broadcaster, but I really do love like the connection that the entire booth, it feels like, has just made over the last year or so with Dirks and just kind of the vibes coming off it. And I don't want to paint it in a weird light because very often when I praise Benetti, it leads to other people like criticizing what he replaced. Whereas I feel like Benetti just kind of stands on his own as a very good broadcaster. So just in your perspective, like, what do you think it's been about him and this booth that's kind of transcended? What do you think's led to the connection that's been made?
Because Jason came here and wanted to understand our city.
Yeah.
That was the number one thing he wanted to do. And I say our city because I am a Detroiter too. Yeah. And I tell Jason that all the time. He's done such a great job of capturing what Detroit is about. He didn't come in here with his own way of doing things. He didn't want this to be Chicago for him. He didn't want it to be that way. He didn't want it to be the exact same thing. He didn't want to do things the exact same way. He wanted to understand the fans here. He wanted to understand the way the city works. And you heard it when he said a team that, what did he say? Something, the odds, a city
that doesn't care about the odds.
Yes, a city that doesn't care about the odds as a team that matches. Like that's, he nailed it, right? Yeah. But that's because he understands the city. And I think any good broadcaster, when you're the face of an organization and the voice of an organization like that, you have to understand every aspect. And especially in Detroit, we have very passionate fans that love their sports, that love their broadcasters. And that's an amazing thing. And he's done a great job of really trying to embed himself into that world. And I remember the first weekend in September when he was gone to do some college football, my DMs were flooded. Where's Jason? Where's Jason? Is Jason okay? Like, yes, he has some national assignments that he still has to work on. So it's phenomenal to see the way that he's become a Detroiter so fast. Like everyone loves him.
Yeah, no, I got questions about that for the final series of people asking me, like, is he going to be there for the last week? And I'm like, man, I wish I knew. I don't know. I hope so. I mean, he's great.
I don't think he wanted to miss that. It was in his heart that he needed to be there to watch.
For sure. And that's a great point you bring up because I feel like having listened to a lot of, like, radio and sports broadcasters, like, it's a very difficult thing to go from one city to another and not have that, like, phoniness where it's like, man, you haven't been here. Like, what do you know about this place?
Yeah.
It really felt pretty early on. One, like he wasn't trying to force it. And then two, obviously, like, I think that his biggest strength is just who's ever in the booth with him, he has good chemistry with. He asks good questions. Like, he's a really knowledgeable guy. He's a funny guy. So it's been a blast. I guess with you've had the privilege now of you've worked with him, you've worked with Dan Dickerson on radio. Two, I mean, how lucky are we? Like, that's insane that like two A+ broadcasters. Like, Detroit's history of broadcasters in general is pretty incredible. What people talk about the similarities because, you know, they're both great at what they do. They're established broadcasters, but like, do you see anything? Is there something that maybe Jason does differently that works, or something that Dan does differently that works, where maybe they kind of go separate directions, but they end up in the same place as both being elite broadcasters?
Well, they're very different. They're great. Both of them great people that get along very well, but very different people. And I think that is what makes them so great together. I don't know how many people have listened to Have a Seat, their podcast that they do together. You can sense the differences there. Like, Jason can come up with these off the wall questions that are just super, you know, that spark up this amazing conversation. And Dan is really, really baseball oriented. And that's great. And the other thing that I would say is super different is like, radio and baseball, like calling baseball on the radio is, any sport on the radio is way different than TV, but baseball in particular, like just being able to paint a picture of everything that's going on, and you really can't miss anything, because think about it, no one can see what's happening. So you can't miss anything. So Dan is super, super detailed, and not that Jason isn't. Jason can do that too, and he has done it on the radio. But I think that's where you see the differences. You can see some of the TV personality come out in Jason, and he can kind of go in some different directions with the things that he talks about, because the fans can see the game, right? Mm-hmm. So Dan stays very locked in on everything, and it amazes me. It is incredible. And him and I have gotten into a groove. Like, when I chime in on the radio, I have to make sure I find a pause for every pitch. Mm-hmm. And it's become a really cool rhythm between the two of us, that when I did some TV games, I actually had to kind of get out of my head a little bit. I'm like, wait, I don't have to stop for every single pitch. I can talk over one and it's okay, right? And give it back to the play-by-play. So I just think the two of them are so great at their crafts, and Dan's done some TV too, but just the description and everything that you have to put into radio is just a little bit different than TV. And that's where you see some of the differences there. Yeah.
And that actually kind of perfectly led into what my next question was going to be, which is, you know, I think that calling baseball it's a difficult, like, it's the highest art form in a lot of ways for broadcasters, whether it's on the radio or TV. But for you, as somebody who does both, is there a different way that you go about preparing, or is there a different cadence maybe or rhythm when you're doing something on the radio versus how you prepare for something on television?
Yeah, it's the prep and the work that goes into it is pretty similar, but the way you present the stories are different, right? So in baseball, I can chime in and I can talk about that story for maybe an inning and a half with Dan, right? Because we've got that rhythm down. We can bounce back and forth. In TV, the reporter role comes in, you come in a little quicker, right? So you've got maybe 20, 30 seconds to put all of the meat of the story that you want in there. And Jason's very good at coming back to it if there's more to talk about. But being able to squeeze a really good story into a really short amount of time, that's an art form too. And there are some people that are really, really good at it out there. And that's something that I've had to kind of learn how to do, because when I'm with Dan, like I said, it can be a little bit more conversational. When you go over to TV, it's a little bit more, it's tighter. But like I said, when you work with Jason Benetti and he knows you still have more on that story, he's going to come right back to you at some point too. But it's been really cool. And it's just behind the scenes stuff that some people that are watching the game or listening to the game don't really think about, like how different that can be and the prep can be and how you tell the story.
This is a question I've wanted to ask a baseball broadcaster for a long time, but have the new rules on the pitch clock made calling games easier or more difficult? Because you do have less empty space, but in a lot of also probably less time to tell stories.
Right. That's the hardest part about, especially on TV, just getting some of that story in that you want to, because if you're doing a Tarek Skubal game, you better talk a million miles an hour because he works so fast. So you could miss 3 pitches and the inning could be over. But by the time you tell a story, I think it's impacted the game in a very positive way. I think the pitch clock is great. I love how quick games move and how the flow is just, it's great. I think it's been awesome. It's made baseball even more entertaining than it was before. And from a broadcaster standpoint, that's something that I'm willing to sacrifice, having to tell my stories a little bit quicker. I think, it has made it a little harder to get in as much as you would like to get in a game, because there are so many things that you don't get to. That's another thing a lot of people don't know. Yeah. You prepare all these stories and you get to like 4 or 5 of them, and you have 4 or 5 more that you didn't get to tell. So I think it has made it a little bit more difficult from that standpoint, but I think it's great for the sport. So I wouldn't complain about it.
I've loved it. Yeah. And I guess it's just even, especially in the regular season, like it's so many. And to me, it hasn't taken away from what I worried about with new rules is like to me, it has not taken away from the strategy of the game. It hasn't taken away from the entertainment value. In fact, I would argue with stuff like stolen bases being up, like we're getting way more action in way in a way shorter time frame. I mean, the people who are listening to this now, like the Mets and Braves just played this crazy game under 2.5 hours, like in 8-7 ball game. Like that's wild. I wanted to just transition here, ask a few just questions kind of about you, because your ascension has been pretty incredible. And I know this tweet exists somewhere and I got to find it, but I remember I was watching, I don't know how I came upon this. I was watching state champs at a bar in the west side of Lansing in like 2018. And I shot out a tweet being like, I don't know who this is on state champs right now, but I think she's really good. And state champs I know has churned out. So like, I mean, I don't want to brag, but like OG, like in Daniella Bruce's camp, maybe, I don't know. But
oh my God, you were like the start of it. Is this what I owe a little?
God, no, you did it yourself. But I was on board early. I recognized you early on. State champs has become like, for people who don't know, like that's a that's a factory like of people that turn out like a lot of broadcasters. Yeah.
They were doing for a long time they were on Fox Sports Detroit when it was right. Sports Detroit, and then they kind of transitioned to doing stuff just digitally, but they still have all these incredible shows. And yes, like Lauren Jabara worked for state champs, and now she's covering the NBA at the highest level that you can. Just some really great people have come out of there. It was a great experience. I love that you saw it. That's awesome.
Yeah, well, I know Jenna came from there.
Yep, Jenna.
Yeah, down killing it in Chicago as well.
Yeah.
Did you go straight from state champs to doing Red Wing stuff, or did you have a stop in between?
No, I was straight there, but my career path was very unique in comparison to what everybody else kind of does in the broadcast world. So it was 2016 when I graduated, started working for state champs almost immediately after I graduated from Michigan State. And then in 2017, Little Caesars Arena opened up. And that was going to be the first, it was 2017. So that would have been the first year of Red Wings hockey at Little Caesars Arena. They had a bunch of new positions that opened up. So it was timing really that got me into the door right when LCA opened. Red Wings made new positions. I was game night staff at first, and then I kind of worked my way into the full-time realm, and then Tigers came into the mix. So it was a non-conventional path based on what you're told when you go through journalism school. You're going to go work in the middle of nowhere, Nebraska, and then you're going to have to bounce around to different markets. And it was just a little bit of an unconventional way, but I love it. I'm glad it works out that way.
Yeah. And I have mad respect for people that do that, just because I'm so Michigan/Detroit centric that like, I don't know if I could put my entire heart and soul into, I think you're like to be like, if I got a job in like, let's say, in Chicago, let's say, and I'm covering White Sox and Cubs, like, dude, I'd still be checking Tiger scores. Like, I feel like I couldn't adjust.
I'm with you. And I feel like this might shoot myself in the foot one day when somebody wants to call me in for a job, but I'm always going to love Detroit sports. Right. And it is hard. Like you said, you give those people a lot of credit just to put your heart and soul into it. And maybe they're better than at being a little bit less biased than I am. So that is a perk of it. Right. But covering sports in your hometown, the cities you were a fan of, like I got to be a part of that celebration on Friday night. And I told a couple of the guys, I'm like, I know you might not understand this, but I grew up here. Like I've been through the ups and the downs of this team. So to be a part of this is something I will never forget. There's
a weird thing with certain people where like, I think one of the reasons why people have been endeared to you is like, we know you're a fan. We can tell like you've grown up with this team. It's like, my content is obviously much weirder, but it's like, I make no bones about the fact that like, I want my team to win.
Yep.
On an embarrassing level. Like I really care about this, and you try to be as objective as possible, but like, it's also like, it's better for everyone involved, media, broadcasters, if the team is successful. Like, you're in Houston right now because they played well. Like that wouldn't be the case if they lost 90 games. So yeah, no, I think that's definitely a unique thing. Of course, you made some history a few years back, 22, I believe. I think it was 2022, when you being the first woman to call a Red Wings game, which is obviously incredible. And you've called a few since then. You've obviously done Tiger stuff. Did you know right away about that you had been making history? Were you informed of that, or was that not something you'd found out about until afterwards?
No, I knew, but I really tried not to focus on that too much, especially going into my first game doing color. And it was such a crazy scenario because it was still COVID era.
Yeah.
And because Paul Woods, who I was filling in for on the radio, had tested positive for COVID, he was not allowed to travel, which meant Cal was not allowed to travel, which meant we did not travel on that. So I called those games from Little Caesars Arena on a monitor, and they were West Coast games. So it was like 10 p.m. starts, and there was just a lot to prepare for. And so yes, I did know, but my mind was elsewhere until after it sunk in. And again, that's like being from here and holding that title is something I'm so proud of. I'm so excited that I get to do that.
Yeah, no, I remember it now because that was the weekend. I was in Detroit that week. That was the week when Michigan and Michigan State were supposed to play basketball at Chrysler Center, and Michigan had to cancel because of COVID.
Yep.
And I was going to go to that game, and I was staying at my friend's place. And I think that's when I messaged you because I knew that you were calling that game. It's a unique thing, I guess. I don't know. I want to word this correctly, where I don't think like annoying is the right term. But do you ever like maybe get frustrated with the fact that there is so much focus on that? Because like to me, being good at talking about sports, that's a genderless thing. Like that's if you know what you're doing, like that's great. Like I'll listen to somebody if I feel like they're knowledgeable. Do you ever kind of like maybe feel boxed in by the fact that like, you know what you're doing? Like, yeah, you're making history with it by being the first woman, but does it ever get frustrating?
It's a little, like sometimes I wish, it's amazing. I'm so happy that I did it. And I'm so happy that I get to hold that title for like, that's in a history book somewhere. That's going to be a trivia question one day or something. Yep. And that gets to be my name. That's amazing. And I love that. But I also, you're right. It is kind of to the point where it's like, who cares if it's a woman, a person of color? None of that matters, right? Like it's if you're good at your job, you're good at your job, and the work was put in to be there. And you never want people to think, which can be the perception sometimes, is that, oh, I only got to do that because they wanted to put a woman in that position.
Well, there's always going to be that.
Yeah, you're going to have that perception sometimes, which is a terrible perception to have, number one. Right. And I that's the stuff that I'd like to avoid with it, and that I don't think women in this industry deserve anymore, because it's shown how much work they put in and how many can really hold their own and are really freaking good at this, right? Like, do less women do this in the industry? I mean, probably. It is still a male-dominated industry, but I think that it's just something I think frustrating is kind of a right word for it. It's like, let's just forget about that. Like we're out here having fun. We're out here calling games, and it doesn't matter what gender or race. None of that really matters. Yeah.
And I also think your best counterpoint to anyone who kind of throws that out there is the fact that like, they wouldn't have brought you back if you weren't good.
Yeah, right. I probably would have lost my job that day. Right. Terrible.
Yeah, if they just wanted to do it for the press, you would have done one game and never been called back. But you've continued to do it. You've gone and advanced with the Tiger stuff as well. Now, I asked about doing baseball on the radio versus television, but to me, I mean, hockey and the pace that moves at is like the antithesis of baseball in terms of just like, it's fast paced. You're always on the edge of your seat, and then you can breathe for a few minutes and immediately goes back into the action. Does it ever get tough to kind of change your mindset going from sport to sport, knowing that one is going to move at an incredibly different pace than the other?
The two sport thing is fairly new to me. It's just been, I think it's been 3 years now that I've done both. And it's crazy. It is very hard to kind of switch your brain, right? Like when the Tigers run is over and I go back to hockey, it is going to be hard for me to get right back into hockey. And the same thing's going to happen to me in February when I'm mid hockey season and we start talking about going to spring training. And I'm like, oh man, we have baseball already. Like how is that switch going to flip? And it does happen. And I think just being able, like with hockey, it was my first sport. So I think that's where my comfort level is still there. I'm getting way more comfortable in baseball, and I absolutely love baseball like I never thought I would. So that's a huge thing for me now too. But it is tough to switch it's not so much as the speed of the game. I think that it's just more so your head's still in one season and you're supposed to be in another season. So it does get tricky. It's hard to explain too.
Yeah, no, it's I'm sure it's a noticeable shift. I mean, it's that you're probably cognizant too. So, I've always, like, I like hockey. I do. I've rarely, for some reason, just like, except for when they've been in the playoffs, like gotten super, super into it. But I went to a few games at LCA last year. I thought it was awesome. Like, and I think the facility is great. I think the environment's great. I guess coming into the season, it seems like expectations are kind of at least playoffs or bust. Is that sort of where you're at with the team? Do you feel like they could be above that, below that? Where you're kind of your expectations?
Well, here's the interesting thing with the Red Wings is I do think that you're going to get younger this year. You're going to see some younger guys in that mix. And does that mean a regression? I don't want to say regression. That's the wrong word. But when you have young talent in the mix, we've seen some of the mistakes that can come with that and some of the time that it takes to adjust to the league. And I think they need to figure out their goalie situation. I think that's still very much up in the air. They have 4 goalies right now that could potentially play for them. 2 of them are likely pegged for Grand Rapids, so it might be 3 in Detroit. And I think that's going to be a question mark. How can that play out? But I think that they did make improvements too. So I think Simon Edvinson's going to be better this year because he got the experience he did last year. You bring in Tarasenko when you lose David Perron. I think that's a great hole to fill. And him and Patrick Kane seem like they already have some chemistry. Lucas Raymond and Mo Seider getting their deals done is huge. Everyone can start the season with a little weight lifted off their shoulder. So to me, it's not exactly playoffs or bust. But I think it would be a disappointment if they don't find themselves right there again this year. It would be.
Would you say their situation in a lot of ways is kind of comparable to the Tigers with the sense if you have all this young talent and with that will probably at some point come a little bit of regression, but what you exchange it for is a much higher ceiling. Like for the Tigers, like what Cole Keith was the first 2 months, it's like we'll take that because what he's developed into is a legitimately solid major league player. Do you feel like they're kind of fair comps?
Definitely. And I've said it all along that they're on the same paths right now. They're kind of moving at the same pace. And I think the Tigers making the playoffs this year is huge. And now the Red Wings are going to want to do the same thing next year. But Steve Yzerman is very honest about the fact that he is not building a team that gets into the playoffs and just, that's it, right? That they have one nice run and that's it. He wants to build something sustainable that the year they make it is not the first and the last, it's the first of many, right? So that's where he's at and he knows how to do it. We've seen him do it. So I think that it might take a little longer on that side. It does in hockey, but it's headed in the right direction. And I think he's added some great pieces this year too.
You've had experience, obviously, with both the Red Wings and the Tigers, 2 teams that are owned by Chris Ilitch. And yet I feel like the way that they're perceived sometimes is drastically different despite having the same ownership. Do you feel like, have you noticed differences in the way that one front office goes about their business versus the other? Or do you feel like they're kind of similar?
Well, I mean, the easy answer to that is there's a hard cap in one league.
That's a big part of it.
Yeah. And then in baseball, there's not, right? So that makes an impact. And the Red Wings now are a cap team. So if you now that they've got Lucas Raymond and Mo Seider on these big deals, they're getting very close to being a cap team. So you have to find ways to work around that. And I think that is one of the battles in hockey. And that is one of the things that makes it a little bit slower in the rebuilding process. So as far as the way that the teams are run, I know that Scott Harris is very analytical. He uses numbers a lot, and hockey's trying to get into that still. They're kind of the last sport. I don't want to say last sport, but they're a little slower into getting into the analytics and figuring out exactly how to use those. So you do see the differences from that aspect too. Completely different sport, so it's a little difficult. But I think we're still trying to figure out, even as broadcasters, like when you look at the advanced stats in hockey, like what actually matters? What do coaches look at that actually matters? What does a general manager look at that actually matters? And with Scott Harris, we can kind of see what he dominate the strike zone, right? Those are certain statistics that they like to look at and analytics that they like to look at that match with that aspect of the game. So I think that part of it, it's interesting. And I think hockey will catch up eventually.
Yeah, for sure. And I feel like football over the last decade, there's been a big influx of that as well with analytics and the way that, you field position and fourth down, going for it on fourth down and stuff like that. So no, that's really fascinating. One thing I saw an interview with you where you brought up, because I think people know you as somebody who's behind a mic or in front of the camera, but you've said some of the stuff that you've done that you're most proud of or things you've done behind the scenes. I guess just on a personal level, like what's some stuff behind the scenes work that you've done that maybe people didn't know you worked on, or maybe there's just something you're really proud of?
Well, a lot of the things you see me in, and it's changed a little bit as I've progressed in my career, but especially when I first started and really up until last year, I edited all of my own work. So anything like when Art and I were doing the Word on Woodward shows but I edited those. So, and like I said, a lot of people don't really know that, right? So I learned how to edit in college. And I've always thought I tell people all the time, learn how to edit, learn how to be able to operate a camera, learn how to do all of that, because you're so valuable in this industry if you can do it all by yourself, right? If you can take a project from point A all the way to the finish line, like it's great. And that's what I've been able to do. And the other thing is learning just how a broadcast works behind the scenes. It's a smaller scale that I learned on, but when I used to do the pregame and intermission shows at Little Caesars Arena for hockey games, I was scripting the show. I was deciding what graphics I wanted, what highlight packages I wanted to use, and doing all of that and working with the behind the scenes crew helped me be a better broadcaster. I know when things are coming and where they're supposed to be and what's going to be on each and every graphic that pops up over me when I'm talking, or, just stuff like that. And highlights, if you got to watch your highlight packs. Like if you are creating them, you got to know what highlights are coming when you're talking, right? So there's just so much behind the scenes stuff that has ultimately made me a better broadcaster. And as I continue to grow as a broadcaster, some of those responsibilities dwindle, but I still do it every so often. Like in Traverse City, the interviews I did there, I edited those. When I have the extra time and they need an extra hand, I'm always willing to do that.
As the responsibilities maybe have dwindled, does it get harder for you to not want to have full creative control over the final edit?
A little bit, yes. And I will sometimes, if there's something edited where I'm like, do this instead, or can you cut that? Like then that's the other thing. Like when we shoot something and I'm not editing it, I'll be like, hey, I've said this was the question. I didn't really like the way I did that. Can you just cut that one? And anything like that. And I feel like all of that has made me better when I'm live too. Like when it's live, I just understand the whole production world a little bit better. And it's helped immensely. But yeah, so it does get hard sometimes when you're so used to having the creative control and what goes where and what you can cut and what angle you can use. Like that stuff is sometimes hard to give up.
Yeah, to hand it over to somebody else. It's and I at least with me, like I get in my own head because I see myself so much differently than other people do, which is sometimes a good thing and sometimes a really, really
Most
bad thing.
Do, though. That's not just
right, of course, yeah. So it's like if my hair looks shitty or something like that, like I want to just try to go in there and make a tweak. I'm sensitive like that. Last thing, and I think this is the thing that most people are going to want to hear about. This is the thing that'll be clipped, but you are a known Justin Bieber obsessive. Are you still?
Yes, it's. Thank God in my 30s, I'm not like as crazy obsessed as I was as like a 15-year-old. Thank goodness. But he's always been my favorite, always will be my favorite. So my story with Justin Bieber is when I was 13, 14 years old, I was on YouTube as kids were back then, still are today.
Guilty.
Yeah. So I was on YouTube and I loved Neo. Like his song "So Sick" was like one of my jams back then. And I was
independent. That's why I love her.
So I was like searching Neo songs, and this kid popped up that covered a Neo song in like a talent show, and it just so happened to be Justin Bieber, and I followed his account. So you consider yourself an OG Daniella.
You're going way back. Yeah.
Like before any of that came out, like I was a Justin Bieber fan from YouTube. So I followed really his entire career. I've seen him live 9 times.
I was going to ask you, when was the most recent time?
When was the most recent time? Oh, when he was at the Palace, it was 2016. I did not see his last tour in Detroit, which actually I heard that was when he was sick and he ended up having to cancel some shows. Yeah. So the show was not that great because it was the day before he canceled some. But if he goes back on tour, I'm there.
Yeah.
I'm there. Yeah.
He's one of those guys now because we're around the same age. So it was one of those things where he was either super popular and therefore easy or cool to hate on for a long time. And then as I got into my 20s, nobody wanted to admit like, Sorry is a banger. Like this
he grew up, right? Like his music back in the day was, it was a little girly. I'll admit that. It was for the teenage girls. That's what he wanted to attract, right?
But you could make that argument though you look at every male or female pop star started that way. I mean, Michael Jackson started in the Jackson 5. Justin Timberlake was in NSYNC. Like that's not a particularly unconventional career path. But it's because this is where I feel old because I'm a 2000s kid and like a 2010s teenager. So like now, like people I feel like I have to explain it to half my audience, like how big of a deal he was when he was coming up and I was in like 8th grade and he was like selling out Madison Square Garden.
Crazy.
Yeah.
I remember one of the first shows I saw, it was at the Royal Oak Music Theater. So this was before he started doing stadium tours and arena tours. And it was like you had to win the tickets through like radio stations. And I drove all over the state of Michigan to win these tickets. Okay. Actually, my mom did because I couldn't even drive yet. So shout out to my mom for that one. But I ended up winning the tickets, and it was in December. I waited outside in front of the Royal Oak Music Theater starting at 5 a.m. in December, all the way to whatever, 7 p.m. when the show started. People ask me if I've ever been in a mosh pit, and I have not ever been in an official mosh pit. But that might as well have been.
But you've been surrounded by hungry believers. That's probably about the worst thing.
Like, I had to, and I waited that long so I could be in the front, and there was like a barrier, and I had to hold my ground, and like it was like a workout. After I left that concert, I was just drenched from trying to hold my spot to see Justin Bieber.
Is that your dream interview, Bieber? Or up there?
I would love to. Even if you just let me say hi to him, I don't have to. It's okay. I would just meet him.
I make this joke all the time, and we're gonna manifest it, that the white whale guest for this podcast is Emma Stone, and we're just gonna. I've been talking about that. I'm trying to throw it out there so we can manifest it at some point. But yeah, it's kind of a similar thing where it's like just one person knows one person knows one person.
Yes, somehow, some way. Beebs is gonna hear this too, and hopefully he. I used to tweet him too, like every day on my birthday, and just say like, "Hey, can I get a shout out?" Like I've tried it. Maybe now I haven't tried it in a while. Maybe now that I've got a little bit of a following, and that maybe we can get it to Justin Bieber, I might have to try that this year.
Yeah, but like this is obviously a huge moment for Detroit, and it's a huge moment for you. And for one, and this will not be the last time I say it. In fact, nor is it the first time. I appreciate you doing this. I mean, on quick notice, I wanted to make sure that you could get out of here for the Lions game as well, because we have Monday Night Football going on.
I keep forgetting that's happening, and don't kill me, Detroit fans. I'm a huge Lions fan too, but my head's on baseball.
I got probably about 10 comments on my live stream last night being like, the Lions play Monday Night Football tomorrow, and like, dude, I have not thought about it. And it's like, I get it. It's
a big game.
It's huge. Yeah, no, and it shows how far we've come, that we can be at a point where the Lions are playing on national TV, and it can be like the second most important thing in the city.
Maybe we just don't know how to handle two teams doing this at the same time. We haven't had to handle it in a while. This is great.
We're not used to it. I'm fine stepping into uncharted waters. But like it's been cool to see. You've done a remarkable job, and with everything that you've done, and obviously with you having the local connection, it's been great. So thank you again for doing this. Love to have you on again at some point, maybe during the heart of hockey season, and just keep doing what you're doing. And if you can, with this giant whirlwind, take a second to enjoy it, because this has been a very well-earned experience for you. So thank you so much for coming on, Chris.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It was a blast.
Thank you. Once again, shout out Daniella. Bruce, thank you so much for coming onto the program, joining this, having a discussion as the Tigers prepare for their series against the Houston Astros. I don't know how nervous I came across in that interview, but as I said, some of it probably had to do with the interview. Most of it had to do with the fact that playoffs, baby. I mean, I haven't experienced this since I was 19 years old. Like, a lot has happened in life since then. So I don't know how I'm going to react to it. Probably nervously, as I do with most things. But thank you so much to her for coming on. Follow her on social media. And I mean, she doesn't need the plugs, but I will definitely link to her Twitter and Instagram and all that stuff. She's done a marvelous job as a local kid. I mean, she's an adult, but as a local prospect that's come up and done a heck of a lot of good for the Red Wings, for the Tigers. She's a part of the media now. Like she's done a tremendous job putting herself out there, which is not an easy thing to do on the internet, and not an easy thing to do in the media. And I feel like she has arguably as high an approval rating, unless you're an idiot. She has about as high an approval rating as anybody in Michigan sports media right now. So I really appreciate her coming on. If you want updates of my nervous ramblings during the playoffs, you can follow me on Twitter at Castellani2014. We're on TikTok at Chris Castellani. Subscribe to this podcast. If you're watching this on YouTube, like this video, hit that bell. That way you will get notified every time that I upload. We are on Apple Podcasts. We are on Spotify, and we are trying very hard to put out the best content possible. God bless this team. Thank God for everything that they've done and all the excitement they've brought. And I'm grateful for this. There is such thing as good nervousness, but they are adding on to what is already a very anxious time in my life. We are Austin and I are talking every day, and I know that maybe we go a few days where you might not want to see something, or where you might want to see something, but we are trying to give you the best content possible. And going forward, I'm really trying to kick it into high gear about how to make this something that is not only successful and popular on the internet, but something that can be monetized. You know, I believe in this, and Austin believes in this. And just kind of peeling back the curtain a little bit, it gets a little bit frustrating when you feel like a lot of other people don't. But we're going to keep trying and what reinvigorates me every time is going out and running into Tiger fans and seeing people at the park and knowing, like, you guys have had my back from the beginning. And I owe that to you, and I appreciate the heck out of you. Enjoy this. This has been an amazing Tigers run, and hopefully it's far from over. We are getting playoff baseball for the Detroit Tigers in 2024. That is incredibly special. So thank you once again to Daniella. Follow us on all those platforms. We will be back next week with another interview. I don't know if it's going to be Tiger-based. I don't know if the Tigers are still going to be playing. We'll see what happens, but this is something that I am not taking for granted. I know Austin feels the same way. So thank you very much for listening, everybody. Have a great rest of your day. Peace and happiness, and go Tigers!
We're all behind our baseball team. Go get 'em, Tiger! World Series bound and picking up steam. Go